Today, inshallah, as we are around the birth anniversary of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet and the Messenger, and of course the seal of the prophets, for whom there is no prophet after, we will discuss a little bit about his upbringing and his life, because this understanding of the beginning of the life of the Holy Prophet and how he was raised, along with his marriage as well, is extremely important to try and understand the type of man that Rasulullah actually was. And from his early life up until he gets married, up until the point in which he becomes officially the Prophet, we see a lot of interesting lessons which we can take from his behavior and from his conduct. And of course there is way too much to say when it comes to Rasulullah. There is too much that we can take from him. Indeed, every action which he conducted in his life is something which we can take heed of and we can apply to ourselves. He is of course the first of the 14 Ma'sumin, and of course he is the main role model for us in our lives. And when it comes to the actual creation of Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended to create all of the creatures and all of the inhabitants of the heavens and the earths, he created the nur, the light of the Holy Prophet Muhammad before anything else. This was the very first creation. And we have different narrations through Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari and from Amir al-Mu'mineen Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, which says that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created, first of all, any type of thing, any type of being, any type of creation, the very first thing was the light of Muhammad. And he said to that light that you are my chosen one, and you are the trustee of my light and my guidance. So we know that this essence, this nur of the Holy Prophet, is the very first thing which is created in this universe. And it is because of that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him that I am going to create the earth and the skies. I am going to lay down and create reward and punishment. And it is due to your nur that I am going to bring into being both the garden of heaven and the fire of Jahannam. Then the ahadith that we have go on, and they talk about the family of Rasulullah. They talk about the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. They talk about the angels. They talk about the souls which belong to people. It talks about the world being created of this covenant which is taken from the souls, which is combined with the belief in one God, with the acceptance of the prophethood of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And this is why the Rawaya says that Rasulullah himself told us that I was the prophet and I was a prophet when Adam was between soul and between body. Meaning when Adam as an individual was in his very early stages and in the process of becoming a human, Rasulullah was also a prophet at that time. And the reason is, of course, because he was created first in terms of being the light which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created before anything else. When we go and talk about the parents of the Holy Prophet, of course we have the Prophet's father Abdullah. Then we have the Prophet's mother, who is Amina. These two individuals and their life stories are something which each individual should go and learn about, should go and read books about, read articles about, to truly understand their status in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of us who are 12 or Shi'as, Ithna Ashari, Ja'fari, followers of the Ahlul Bayt, agree that both Abdullah and Amina and Abu Talib, these three figures who are the most important in the upbringing of Rasulullah, all of these individuals, all the way back, all the forefathers of the Prophet, dating back hundreds, thousands of years, all of them from that lineage of Rasulullah were believers in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They were believers in one God. They were not kuffar. They were not munafiqeen. They all believed in one true God. Amir al-Mu'mineen tells us this openly, and he gives us a very clear statement where he says, Wallah, neither my father ever worshipped the idols, nor my grandfather Abdul Muttalib, nor his father Hashim, nor his father Abd Munaf. They all prayed facing towards the Kaaba, and they followed the religion of Ibrahim. Now this is important to understand, and I'm going to ask a question later on about why it is important that not just the Prophet was a believer in Allah, but all of his forefathers and family members before him were also believers in Allah. When he is a child, he spent a few of those years in his childhood being an orphan. A few months after his father Abdullah marries Amina, he goes on a trip for trade, for business, so that he can help provide for his family. He's going to Damascus, Dimashq. And unfortunately, whilst he's on this journey, he passes away. So the father of Rasulullah is deceased, and he is only left with Amina. Therefore, he begins to spend his early childhood with a woman from Banu Sa'd. And this is a woman called Halima, who was his wet nurse. And due to the difficulties faced by his mother, he lived most of the time with this woman Halima and her husband in the desert. So from a very early age, Rasulullah is faced with a lot of trials and difficulties. It is not easy for an individual, especially at that time in Arabia in the days of Jahiliyyah, to grow up without a father figure to guide him and to show him what it is like to navigate the world of Arabia at the time as a man. When he is only 6 years old, he travels to Yathrib with Amina. And the purpose of this visit is so that he can meet some of the relatives from his father's side. But on the way back to Mecca after this trip, Amina passes away. Therefore, the father of Rasulullah has passed away. Then his mother passes away. At the age of only 6 years old, many children would go off on the wrong path, become completely deviated from this world and from any decent beliefs. However, after the loss of his mother, Rasulullah is taken under the guardianship of Abdul Muttalib. And when he is 8 years old, so 2 years after his mother passes away, the person who took him in and nurtured him from the ages of 6 to 8 also passes away. So we see that there is a trend of figures who are looking after Rasulullah passing away, unfortunately. And some of the narrations we have indicate that this is to try and test the Prophet, but not just to test him, but to show us an example of trials and difficulties. Because if the Prophet can endure all of these losses at such a young age, then we should also be prepared for the inevitable deaths of our family members. And when these deaths do occur, we should be ready to deal with them in an appropriate way. We should be able to have such firm faith in Allah that we do not lose the plot and choose deviancy. Instead, we should remain calm, we should have faith and trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala despite all of these difficulties. After this happens, Abu Talib takes care of Rasulullah. In the house of Abu Talib, his wife, who is Fatima ibn Asad, was so kind to Rasulullah, to the extent that when she passed away and when she departed from this earth, Rasulullah tells us, today my mother has died. Of course, we know his mother is Amina. So why does he say it about Fatima? He says it because the nurturing and the care and compassion of this woman, the wife of Abu Talib, is so intense that she treated Rasulullah as if he was her own son. And we notice that this is a very difficult task to do. We notice that it's very difficult for an individual to love a child who is not theirs so much that that child will feel as though they are their own real, natural, blood-born parents. Yet Fatima does this to Rasulullah. Painting a very early picture, you see then that the Prophet's life from a young age is filled with tragedy, it's filled with death, filled with difficulties. But through his life, he begins to emerge as a character who is known in the city and who is known in the whole of Arabia as a very respectable man. He is someone who people come to settle grievances. He is someone who is known as a person of intellect, a person of knowledge, a person of humility. He doesn't engage in idol worshipping like the rest of the people, the rest of the people who are infected with Jahiliyyah within their minds and within their souls. He is different, and everyone can see that he is different. Well, they can't quite put their finger on what type of man he is, meaning a man of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because they are not fully accustomed with true belief. they're not fully accustomed with the akhlaq and the etiquettes of a mu'min. There is one person, however, who is not from the family of the Prophet, who does not know his personality, who does see this, and that is Khadija. Now, Rasulullah came when he was a Prophet and he left us with lots of valuable lessons. One of these lessons he tells us is that the best of you are the ones who are best to their wives. And he is a shining example of this. But going back to before he is married, Rasulullah is heavily involved with trade and business. He is helping Abu Talib in trade, and once he got old enough, Abu Talib entrusted him to go and accompany the trade caravans all around the region. However, Abu Talib was in a very poor financial situation. He did not have a lot of money, and it wasn't possible for him to give Rasulullah equipment to go and do his own thing and to create his own business ventures. He therefore asks him to be an agent and act on behalf of a very rich, noble lady called Khadija. And she is known to be at the time the most wealthy, rich person in the Quraysh. It is said that when she would take a caravan of merchandise out with her to try and sell, then this would be worth more than the caravans of all of her tribe and all of the other tribes put together. But as we mentioned, Rasulullah as a person has a reputation for being a man with extremely good qualities, for being a humble man, a pious man, someone who does not please others. He seems to simply please Allah. And this reputation for honesty and integrity led Khadija to entrust the Holy Prophet with all of the goods which she had for sale. And the way in which he would trade meant that there would be more profit than she had received before. He was trading it in a way which was bringing more benefit than she had ever seen. And the reason for this is because he did not trade in a haram manner. He traded in a halal manner. And the blessings which came with this halal income were twofold. And Khadija noticed this. So she is impressed with it. She is quite happy with the reward which is being brought from her. Only 2 months after he returns to Mecca, and he is already married to Khadija. Now, one of the interesting things is that Rasulullah does not go to Khadija himself and ask for her hand in marriage. Instead, it is the other way around. Lady Khadija asks someone to go to Rasulullah and ask if he would be interested in the engagement. Now, this is something we don't see these days, something which is entirely uncommon in most cultures in the world. And it's something we should ask ourselves why. If the most perfect example of mankind and humanity started off his marriage with the woman approaching him, then why do we see this as something ayb? Why do we see this as something which shouldn't be done? Is there a problem with a woman going to the man to ask for marriage? No. And if anybody says that it is wrong, then you're saying that the behavior of Khadija and Rasulullah is wrong. And nobody is willing to do such a thing as this. No one is willing to stoop to that level and say that Rasulullah and Khadija's marriage started off incorrectly, because this is a great sin. And this is equivalent to blasphemy, because you're accusing the Prophet of sin and haram, or accusing him of bad behavior, which we know is not possible in his character. Therefore, we should pay attention to it, that it is not always the man who should approach the woman, but the woman can also approach the man, as long as it is done within the correct halal frameworks. Now, some of the narrations, especially from our brothers in Ahl Sunnah, but even some of our Shia brothers, come forward and they say, for example, that Khadija was an old woman when she asked the Prophet to marry her. That she was old and he was young, but this is incorrect. And if we trace back where these rumors came from, we can see that one of the wives of the Prophet likely came up with this rumor. And she used to address Khadija as an old woman, out of spite, out of jealousy, out of anger. And this is something which was common to this particular wife of the Prophet. But we can see that in reality Khadija was not an old woman, she was around the same age as the Prophet. And some of the narrations say that she was a widow, that she had been married before and her husband passed away. But the likelihood is, from our riwayat, that she was not a widow. She had not been married previously before. But this isn't a problem, even if she was married. before and she was divorced and she was a widow, there is no issue. There is nowhere in our religion that says that a divorcee should not be able to marry after. And the opposite. A person who is divorced is entitled to marry as long as they fulfill the correct waiting periods. There is no issue in it. So people should be wary of making such statements or having such judgments. One of the questions which I mentioned I would ask, we established that the lineage and the forefathers of Rasulullah were all believers in Allah. They were all believers in one God. They did not worship idols. They did not engage in kufr. They all believed in one almighty creator. Why is this possible? Why is this a possibility? Why does it have to be this way? There's only one explanation that we have that can truly answer why all of the relatives from before the Prophet until him were believers in one true God. And it's because, as we mentioned, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created before anything in this earth the nur and the light of Rasulullah. And it is not possible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to put that light of the Prophet into dark and dirty people or places. Meaning that the light of Muhammad cannot exist in the loins or in the heart of a kafir, cannot exist in the heart of a munafiq. Therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not put such cleanliness into the hearts of a disbeliever. Also, how could it be possible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to punish the ancestors, the people before the Holy Prophet on the Day of Judgment, and therefore humiliate the Prophet in front of the entirety of humanity? It doesn't make sense. But the most key reason is because Rasulullah is established as a pure, 100% authentic, pure light, and therefore this light cannot be in the heart of a dirty, disbelieving person before his creation. Secondly, we know that the Prophet suffered a lot of family deaths when he was a child. And he was orphaned not once but twice as an infant. What do you think this taught the Prophet? Do you think that it had any influence on his life? Of course. It had a very big impact on the way he behaved and the lessons which he tried to teach people who came after him. Why? Because he understood that it was the will and the decree of Allah that he should go through all of these sufferings, that he should go through all of these pains, all of these difficulties, something which an ordinary individual would crumble at. Why? So that he can understand and set forward an example for us on how to bear these difficulties with sabr, with humility, with patience, and therefore it would raise his stature in the eyes of human beings to the level of perfection. Because as we mentioned, only a person who is close to or is perfect can overcome such trials and tribulations without having any mal feelings within himself. Thirdly, what is the significance and what do you take from Lady Khadija being the one who proposed to the Prophet? We think in our communities, as I mentioned, that it has to be the man who initiates these. But we need to think why. Why do we think the man has to initiate the marriage? Why does the man have to initiate the proposal? Because, unfortunately, we as Muslims have decided to place our culture before our religion. We pay more attention to what the Shaykh of the Ashira will say rather than what Rasulullah himself says. If the Shaykh of the Ashira says, no, the woman cannot ask the man for marriage, then who the hell is he? Why can he say this? He can't. And if an individual chooses to believe in this, then he is following his own Ashira, he's following his tribe. The same tribal mentality that Rasulullah tried to put aside. Why? Because it is a symbol and a sign of the people of ignorance, the people of Jahiliyyah. In Arabia, the tribalism and the mentality of we must stick to our own and follow our own customs and our own practices is something which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent our religion to try and do away with, to try and get rid of. Therefore, following religion over culture and following religion over customs and traditions that our fathers did and their grandfathers did is of the utmost importance. The Holy Quran addresses this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala condemns those people who, when they are found to be doing something which is wrong and they are asked, why do you do that which is wrong? They say, well, my father did it, and his grandfather did it, and his father did it, without any thought or without any reasoning as to why they carry out these acts. Therefore, if in your family there comes a woman, whether it be your sister or your daughter, and she asks you to help her propose to a man, there should be no hesitancy from you to fulfill this request if the man is a good person, he is a good Muslim, he prays his salah, he has good akhlaq. There is no hesitancy to be allowed if the woman comes and asks for this. And if you say no because it is aib, or you think yourself that it is haram, then clearly you do not know the religion that you follow or the Prophet, the Nabi, who you claim to be an adherent and follower of. Because we understand that we should set forward an example for our children and our offspring as to how Rasulullah lived his life. And to do that means following in the customs of him. The relationship between Khadija and Rasulullah is something which was based on love, was based on kindness, compassion, caring for each other. It wasn't based on the fact that this family knows this family and therefore we marry them off because we know the family. No, this is a cultural custom, this is a tradition. This isn't something found in our religion. If there is two people who have a love for each other and they will benefit the Ummah and they will benefit the religion of Islam by being together, and they will help each other gain religiosity, gain closeness to Allah, then this is a marriage which is commended, which is recommended for us to try and promote. You have to remember that Rasulullah spent 25 years of his life with Khadija. He chose Khadija and Khadija chose him based on the qualities of one another, not because one of them belonged to one family and one of them belonged to this family. Families mean nothing. You can have great individuals, great families, great ashiras, and their offspring and their children may turn out to be on the side of shaitan. Even now we have some famous families, whether it be Ahl Sadr or the Hakims, mostly any family where you talk about, some of the greatest individuals, yet their children and offspring turn out to be deviant individuals. Families do not mean anything. What matters is the individual and the qualities that that individual has. As Rasulullah talks about his marriage with Khadija, he says that she believed in me when nobody else in Arabia did. She embraced Islam whilst all the other people took part in kufr and disbelieved in me. And she helped me and she comforted me when there was nobody there to lend me any hand or support. And this is the type of marriage which an individual should seek, not based on looks, not based simply on beauty and lust, but based on whether that person will take them on a journey closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The last thing I want to mention is something which was said in the lecture of Sayyid Muhammad Baqir al-Qazwini, where he talks about how one day he was in America and he gets on a flight. He sits down beside an American woman. She's either a Christian or she is an atheist. She doesn't believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Sayyid is wearing his amama, he's wearing his clothes. And they begin speaking to each other. And they begin to speak about the religion of Islam, specifically about women. And she says to him, well, I have a very negative outlook on this religion of Islam. Why? Because the way they treat women is backwards. They treat women negatively. They lock them away in the home, they beat them, they see them as objects. The Sayyid says to her, 14 centuries ago, there was a man. At age 25, he went out and was proposed to by the wealthiest businesswoman who at the time had her own independent business. She used to trade herself. She ran her own company. She made her own money. And they got married to one another. When they got married, he allowed this woman to go and continue on her business adventures. He allowed her to be a businesswoman, to be a tradesperson. He didn't keep her locked up at home. This was the Holy Prophet. And his wife was Khadija. And he allowed her to continue being a businesswoman. Did Rasulullah go and marry a woman and lock her at home behind closed doors and not allow her to go out and to make her own money and to live independent lifestyle? No. He did the opposite. He married a woman who observed hijab. And as we mentioned, the purpose of the hijab is so that the woman can leave the house and be protected in the outside world. This is the example which we should have. And what does it show about the Prophet? Does it show that he wants women to be tied up at home, kept bored, miserable, with no education, with no work, with no income? No. He wants the opposite of this. He wants the women to go out into the world and to set an example for other women as to what Islam gives women in terms of rights and responsibilities. And this is the true way in which a woman should be. A woman, for example, like Amina Sadr, a scholar, activist, someone who is not afraid to go out into the world and to speak and to challenge oppression and tyranny, to challenge injustice with her voice, with her actions, to gather women in social circles, in majalis, in the Husayniyah, and make them be at the forefront of any revolution against tyranny. The same way that Sayyidah Zainab used her platform as a woman to go and speak out against this injustice and tyranny in the courtyard of Yazid when she condemns him and she condemns the system that he stands for. Therefore, this is the legacy of Rasulullah. This is the legacy of Sayyidah Khadija. This is the legacy of this prophetic outlook which the Holy Prophet wanted us to learn from, and not just learn from and not act upon, but to make it a focal point of our lives and how we interact with the entire world. And to finish, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have mercy on the mu'mineen and the mazlumeen, and for all the shuhada, especially in Gaza. Please recite Surah Al-Fatiha to Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.